here in this video, we're going to take a look at creating QVDs. We've talked about these things before, and part of the discussion is we extract data, we create QVDs, and it all seems kind of like magic until you see it done. So I'm going to show you some of the data we're going to utilize. We're basically looking at some standard patient data. We got patient ID, visit ID, admission date and time, and ignore the fact that these might be in different types of entities in your system. But we've got some breakdowns here, and you can see this is already a little bit denormalized. But we do have some fields where we've got admission method, and this is normalized data, and then we've got a table for admission types that would be tied to this. And we've got diagnosis codes and diagnosis types, discharge methods. What we're going to do for this example is walk through bringing this data raw into Qlik and then starting that next layer of QVDs as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to Qlik now that you've kind of seen this data. I've already got a database connection created. So what I'm going to do is go in and say I want to select this data. I'm going to select the owner here, and I'm going to take a look, and it's going to build my list of tables. I'm going to pick the tables that I want, and I want the patient's data. And you'll see that it shows me load, patient ID, visit ID. It's got all of my data, including the select command here. Okay, so what this is giving me the ability to do is if I want to rename fields, I can, but I don't have to. And in this case, I really don't care to. I'm just taking raw data out of SQL Server, and I'm going to store this into files that we can use later. And we'll worry about the naming of fields when we need to. So I'm going to uncheck this include statement, and you'll see now it's basically just, hey, I'm issuing a SQL statement, go select blah, 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 from a table. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and insert that into my script, and now I'm going to give this a name like patients, and I'm selecting patient ID, visit ID, and all these things, and actually I honestly don't care. I'm just really doing a select star from the patients table. If I were to go ahead and load this, it's going to make the connection, it's going to load that data, and if I were to go ahead and bring up a screen to look at my data model, I'll preview this, and you'll see we've got all of our patient records. And that's basically how this is done. I don't really care to use this data in this application. All this application is intended to do is extract that data and create a QVD. So we can store QVDs to files. What I'm going to do is I'm looking at my list of data connections, and I don't have one that is where I want it to be. So I'm going to create a connection that's to a folder. And at this point, I've got to determine where I'm going to store this. I actually have a directory created that has a QVD data files directory. I'm going to call this QVD Files. And you can give these things any name that you want. Once these connections are created at the server, you can secure these to who has access to write into them, who has access to read out of them. We're going to use a real simple example here. I'm going to just simply create this folder. Okay, now I've got that folder, and if I were to scroll down here, we would see that I have that. What I'm going to simply do is issue a store command. I'm going to say store the patients into, and now I have to give it the name of this library. And you'll notice the way it gives these library names. I'm going to say, I'm going to store this into the library, and there's a syntax for this. And I can copy this name actually. So I could come into here and say, hey, give me this name to make sure I get the exact name that was used. In real life, you would have gone to the management console and got rid of my username as part of this connection. But in this case, we have it, so I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. So now I've got the name I want, And oh, by the way, I want to call these patients.qvd. I'm going to tell it I want to save it as a QVD file. There are other file formats you can use. And now if I were to load this data, it's going to create it. I bring it back, and you really don't know if there's any difference. So I'm going to go out to my folder and take a look. And there, sure enough, there's my patient's information. Now, let's say I've got a whole bunch of other tables I want to use. I could keep coming out here, going back one at a time if I choose. Okay. And I can get the admission table. And I could choose multiple tables here if I want to do these. You'll notice this, but I'm going to try to save you some time on something. So I'm going to do this same thing for the admission table, but notice that the name of our other table is just discharge. So I'm going to say insert this into the script. I don't need the library connection there anymore. Okay. And now at this point I can store these as well. So I want to store these admission records into an admission QVD. Okay. Now I'd like to do this same process for discharge. And because I know what that table is, I don't even have to use the wizard. So with SQL Server, populating that list comes up pretty easy, but sometimes with Oracle, it's not that quick. But because all I'm literally doing is issuing a SQL command, select star from, I can just manually type these names in and move right along and make a whole lot of progress with this. So if you've got 100 tables that you need, you could actually generate this script in SQL Server and then copy and paste it in if that's what you chose to do, if you're pretty familiar with SQL and using the system tables. So I'm going to just manually do this. I haven't gone to the wizard at all. So now what should happen is I read the patient's data and I store it. I read the admission data and I store it. I read the discharge data and I store it. Okay. I'm going to load this data. You'll see this happen. Okay. I go get that. If I were to look out at my file, my folder, you'll see that I've got those 3 QVDs here. Now, in reality, do I even need to retain this data anymore? All I'm trying to do here is read and store so that other applications have access to this. So one of the other things that I can do within my load script is simply say drop the patients table. And I can drop, if I could type as fast as I spoke, I could drop the table admission, and hopefully I won't make the same mistake a third time. Drop table discharge, and if I were to run this again, it creates it, it saves it. I've got those 3 files, and if I look at my model, I have nothing there. It says, ooh, you've got no data, which is fine with me because that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to just load data and get rid of it. So that's my first layer of QVDs. Now the question is going to come in, what do we do with those at this point? That's a great question. I'm going to come back to Sense. This was my QVD builder. I'm going to build a new app now. This is going to be my important second layer QVD. Okay. I'm going to go in and open this app, and I'd like to get data at this point. So I'm going to come to my data layer. Okay. I'd like some patient data, please. Now, I could go to a database, but I don't need to. I've already extracted that data. It's been done for me. Perhaps that data was loaded and then incrementally changed at night. I can simply point to my data files and bring that patient's table in. And now when I load this, you'll notice I'm not touching my database at all. I could completely shut my database down and I'm still going to get my data. I load it. You notice it uses this keyword optimize. It's loading this super fast. This could be millions and millions of records because now they're just stored in on a data file and they're compressed already in our format that we need. So I close that. I've got my patient's data. Now let's go ahead and get that admissions data as well. Okay. And I can go take a look at this data model now and see what we have. Okay. Now in this case, you'll see I get lucky. I've got my admission method, and my admission method, the field lines up with admission method of the patient's table. So Qlik joins through this associative model based on those names. So because the names were the same, that's where I get this. Now, here's where I can do aliasing. If I want to call this something different, if I needed to, I could. So perhaps this wasn't admission method down here. I could rename anything as I choose. So we could even use this to rename this in more user-friendly ways. So I can rename fields as I go through. I can also convert things. I say I don't really need the sex because I've got the label, which is the description, and I'm going to simply rename this. Okay, so we can do things like that. In this case, what I'm going to try to do is I want to denormalize my data a little bit. I don't want to have this model where I have this extra layer. I simply want to know the admission already in my patient data. Now you're thinking, why would I care? Well, I'm not thinking about me because I'm pretty good with SQL and modeling. I'm thinking about the end user who wants to do true self-service. Does that make sense? So what I would like to do here when I'm loading this data, I've got the admissions. I bring this in. I've got a couple of options I can do. I can either load this first and do some naming here, or instead of loading this table at all, the way I'm doing this, I can actually just say join. All right, so I'm going to load my patient data, and then I want to join in the admission description. All right, so we can say left join, and there's a number of things we could do. They're all documented by me in a paper that you're welcome to read as our options. But what I'm going to do when I do a join is the first thing I need to load is the field that it's going to join on. Same as if I were doing a join command in SQL. I don't care about the admission ID. I don't care about the admission description group. All I care about, let's say, is the admission description. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to join in and denormalize the patient table such that I get the admission description as part of that table. And oh, while I'm at it, I know I also have this other discharge method. Okay. And I'm going to hope that the field was the same. Okay. Discharge QVD, and we're going to give this a shot. So it's going to load one table patients, and rather than actually creating a table for admission records, I'm simply going to join that in to denormalize my patient table, and then I can actually drop the field. I can remove the field admission method if I want to. And I can remove the field for discharge method if I want to. So that all I have is the descriptions. There's no sense having lookup codes that I no longer need. So load this field not found discharge method. Okay. So let's take a look at what the field is for discharge method. And in this case, it was discharge MTHD. Oh my goodness. There we go. So it's that field instead. So when I'm loading this, what I can do is I want to join my discharge MTHD as and it looks like it wanted me to use the word drop, which is what I had the first time, and then I changed it. Okay, so sorry for the confusion, don't want to reshoot the whole video. Basically what I've done here now is I've denormalized this patient table. So if I go look at the modeling, we'll scroll through here, you'll see I've got all the normal fields, and now I've brought in the actual descriptions for these rows instead. So instead of having a model that had 3, 4, 5 tables like a snowflake or a star schema, I'm denormalizing these patients. Now, once I've done this, guess what? I can store them. Only this time, instead of calling them just patients, instead of just calling them patients, I'm going to call them patients layer 2 perhaps. And now if I look out here, you'll see I've got my raw patients as well as my layer 2. And this could go on and on and on as we rename fields and make things more and more easy for that end user. I want to do the joins for them, but I don't have to do those joins like SQL-ish joins. So there's a number of things I can do. If I had wanted to bring in more of the fields from admission, I could certainly have done that. I could have added as many fields as I need to if our data model says, hey, this is just a one-to-one value. If these were one-to-many values, clearly I wouldn't want to do this. But this is one way of taking that data and just moving it forward so that it's a little bit more self-server friendly. Now, several analysts could go look at the patient's QVD that I build them. I could create separate directories for these different layers. Doesn't really matter. So for all we're trying to do first, I'm going to go ahead and load this one again. For all we're trying to do first is create that first layer of QVD file. Build out a QVD directory somewhere where you store these. You can give these their same exact table names that you have in SQL Server. That's not a problem. All we're trying to do to make sure that we get ready to start up with our next phase for y'all is get these levels of QVDs built. It's just raw data. There's no rocket science or brain surgery going on. We'll then take over and start trying to figure out how to blend that data together. Where does it make sense to denormalize data, join things together? Where are there cases where it's one-to-manys? And we do need to keep these. Where do I just simply need to rename fields? to make things easier, more self-sufficient.